Hey everyone, it's Dr. NightStare. Glad you're here. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Alright, let's get settled. Get comfortable, let your body relax, and just take it easy. The journey had stretched on much longer than I expected, the coast road twisting inland, then back towards the sea with a dizzying persistence. Daisy had fallen asleep hours ago, her head resting against the cool window, and the rhythm of the car had lulled me into a quiet contentment. Finally, a small sign worn by salt air announced the village of Etheria, and I turned the wheel onto a narrower path. The air instantly changed, carrying the sharp, invigorating scent of brine and something else, something green and damp that spoke of ancient rock. Etheria itself appeared as a collection of gray stone cottages huddled together around a tiny stony beach, utterly deserted under the bright afternoon sun. Not a soul moved on the narrow lanes. Not a single child played near the water. The quiet felt deep, but in a way that spoke of a true peace, not an absence. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow, where the modern world felt very far away. We drove through the deserted main street, past a small church and a pub with dark windows, until the road curved steeply upward, leading us away from the village and towards a promontory. There, perched on the highest point, stood the hotel. It was a grand old building, its stone facade weathered to a deep dark gray, its many windows glinting like eyes in the sun. No other structure stood nearby, just the wild, wind-swept cliff and the endless expanse of the sea. I pulled the car to a stop in the small gravel lot, its surface crunching loudly under the tires, a sound that seemed to echo in the stillness. Daisy stirred beside me, blinking against the sudden sunlight. "We're here," I said, my voice a little lower than usual, absorbed by the vastness surrounding us. Inside, the lobby was cool and dim, smelling of old wood and something sweet like dried potpourri. An elderly man stood behind the reception desk, his silver hair neatly combed back. He was tall and thin, dressed in a crisp white shirt and a dark waistcoat. He looked up when we entered, his eyes a pale, watery blue, and a wide smile slowly spread across his face. It was a friendly smile, but it stayed too long, a little too fixed, making the corners of his eyes crinkle in an unnatural way. "Welcome to the Seaview Manor," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Finn and Daisy, yes? We've been expecting you." He handed me a large brass key, its head shaped like a mermaid. "Room 3, top floor facing the sea. You'll find the view quite spectacular." We took the winding, carpeted stairs up, our footsteps sinking into the thick fabric, muffling any sound. The hotel felt empty. The quiet, absolute, disturbed only by the distant cry of gulls carried on the breeze through an open window somewhere. Room 3 was at the very end of a long corridor. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, revealing a spacious chamber with high ceilings and a tall window overlooking the turbulent sea. The room was tidy, furnished with heavy, dark wood furniture. A large bed dominated the center, covered with a thick, white duvet. Daisy walked straight to the window, letting out a soft sigh as she gazed out at the crashing waves. I placed our bags on a luggage rack, then turned to survey the rest of the room. On the wall opposite the bed, above a small writing desk, hung a large oil painting. It depicted a woman in an old-fashioned blue dress standing on a wind-swept cliff, her back to the viewer, looking out at a stormy sea. Her long, dark hair flowed around her face, obscuring most of her features, but the artist had painted her left eye clearly. It was a dark, intense eye, and it seemed to track me. As I moved across the room, unpacking a few items, the eye followed, a knowing gaze fixed on my every motion. I stopped, turning directly towards the painting, and the eye still held me, piercing and unnervingly aware. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air from the open window. It felt as though someone watched me. We unpacked our bags slowly. The unsettling feeling from the painting stayed. Daisy seemed to shrug it off, singing a little tune as she put away her clothes. I tried to dismiss the feeling as a trick of light, the effect of an old artist's style, but the sense of being observed remained. Later, as evening shadows deepened outside, we ate a simple meal from a local shop we had passed, sitting at the small writing desk. The painting remained opposite us. Its eye still seemed to hold my gaze, even in the dim light. I found myself avoiding looking directly at it. After a while, Daisy grew tired. "I think I will turn in," she said, stretching. That drive really took it out of me. I stayed up a little longer, reading a book I had brought. The only sound was the distant crash of waves against the cliff. My thoughts went back to the manager's fixed smile and the painting's watchful eye. Eventually, I closed the book. The room felt cold. I went into the small bathroom, switching on the light. The room was simple, tiled in white. As I splashed water on my face, a sound began. It was a soft, continuous vocalization, seeming to rise from beneath the tiled floor or perhaps from the wall itself. It was not loud, but it filled the small space, a sustained note held without wavering, without words. I froze, dripping water onto the sink. I did not understand the sound. I listened closely. My heart began to quicken. The sound continued, a low, smooth tone that felt present. I called out, "Daisy, are you awake?" No response came from the bedroom. The sound continued. I dried my face and hands. As I reached for the towel, I saw them. Clear handprints were on the surface of the mirror, pressed into the steam from the shower Daisy had taken earlier, or perhaps from the general dampness. They were small prints, not adult hands. I had not noticed them before, and now they were distinct on the glass. My breath hitched. I rubbed at them with a corner of the towel, but they did not smear. They felt permanent, like a part of the glass itself. The soft, continuous vocalization continued, unwavering. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, past the handprints, my eyes wide. I turned off the light and hurried out of the bathroom, leaving the sound behind me. I climbed into bed, pulling the duvet over my head. I could not shake the image of those small hands or the persistent vocalization. Sleep took a long time to arrive. The next morning, the sun streamed through the tall window. I woke to find Daisy already up and dressed. She stood by the window, her back to me, gazing out at the sea. "Morning," I said, my voice thick from sleep. She turned slowly. Her face looked paler than before, thin. Her skin looked clammy, and her eyes held a distant, unfocused look. Her smile, usually so warm and bright, was flat, a painted expression. "Good morning, Finn," she replied. Her voice sounded thin, not like her own. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked, sitting up. "A strange sound from the bathroom." She shook her head, a slow movement. "No, just the waves." Her gaze remained fixed somewhere beyond me. "It is beautiful here, isn't it?" she said, turning back to the window. "We must stay for a long time." "I do not know," I began. I remembered the handprints and the sound. "Maybe we should consider moving to another place, finding a different hotel." She turned back to me. Her eyes sharpened, piercing their earlier dullness. Her voice took on an edge, quiet but firm. "No," she said. "We are staying here. We will not leave this place. Not yet." Her insistence felt unnatural, very strong, and a cold dread came over me. Her hand reached out and touched my arm. Her fingers felt cold and damp against my skin. I pulled back without thinking. Her touch unsettled me. I swallowed the lump in my throat, her cold touch still lingering on my arm. The sun still shone brightly outside, but the light in the room felt different, as if a gray filter had been applied to everything. Daisy walked back to the window, her back to me, the quiet intensity of her earlier words filling the space between us. I had to understand what was happening. I felt a growing sense of urgency, a desperate need to find a reason for her sudden change, a way to pull her back to herself. "Perhaps we should go for a walk," I suggested, my voice a little too loud in the stillness. "Down by the cliffs. Get some fresh air." She turned, her face expressionless, and nodded once. Her movements seemed deliberate, almost stiff, as she picked up a light jacket. We left the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind us. The long corridor felt even colder than usual, and I could hear the faint, distant crash of waves. We descended the winding staircase without a word, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the thick carpet. The lobby was empty, the old manager nowhere in sight. The air here felt thick and still. Outside, the wind whipped around us, carrying the sharp scent of salt and damp earth. The sky above was a brilliant blue, but the sea churned below with a restless energy, its waves crashing against the jagged rocks. We walked along the narrow path that snaked around the cliff edge, the grass flattened by the persistent wind. Daisy moved ahead of me, her stride even and unwavering, as if the fierce gusts did not affect her. I watched her, my heart twisting with a fear I could not name. Her hair, usually lively and catching the light, now seemed dull, hanging heavy around her shoulders. We reached a small outcropping where the path widened slightly, offering a panoramic view of the tumultuous ocean. Daisy stopped at the very edge, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked out at the water, her unfocused eyes staring into the distance. A tremor went through her body, and she began to whisper. Her voice was barely audible above the wind, a dry, rustling sound that seemed to carry no words I could understand. It was a jumble of sounds, a chaotic stream of broken syllables, like a song sung in a forgotten language. Her lips moved constantly, forming shapes that were not words, and her head tilted slightly from side to side. Her face remained pale, her expression distant, yet an intensity emanated from her. I stepped closer, trying to catch a recognizable sound, a sliver of sense. "Daisy?" I said, reaching out to touch her arm. "What are you saying?" She did not flinch, did not seem to hear me. Her whispering continued, a constant, low drone. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, an unsettling, vacant stare that chilled me to the bone. The air around us felt charged, the wind seeming to carry her strange murmurs, weaving them into the roar of the sea. I could not shake the feeling that she was not alone out here, that she spoke to something beyond my sight, something listening in the vast expanse of the churning water. A wave of intense dread washed over me, heavy and suffocating. This was not my Daisy. This was something else. We walked back to the hotel, the return journey feeling longer, more ominous. The hotel's imposing structure seemed to loom larger against the darkening sky. Inside our room, the afternoon light had faded, replaced by the deep shadows of early evening. I turned on the small lamp on the writing desk, its soft glow doing little to dispel the gloom. Daisy walked to the bed and sat down, her posture rigid, her gaze still distant. I turned towards the painting above the desk, drawn by an instinct I could not explain. The woman on the cliff still stood with her back to the viewer, her dark eye still sharp and watchful. But something was different. My breath hitched in my throat. The painting had changed. The solitary figure of the woman was no longer alone. Now, two figures stood on the wind-swept cliff side by side. It was Daisy and I. Our faces were turned towards the turbulent sea, our backs to the viewer, but the artist had captured a chilling detail, the curve of our shoulders, the way our hair fell, the familiar shapes of our bodies. Then I saw our faces. They were not our faces, not truly. Our heads were turned just enough to show our profiles, our lips stretched into wide, unmoving smiles. These were not joyful expressions. They were frozen, unnatural, a silent scream trapped behind painted teeth. The eyes, though mostly obscured, seemed to hold the same unsettling awareness I had noticed in the original woman's single eye. We were captured, static, forever posed on that painted cliff, facing the stormy sea. A sudden, intense panic seized me. I stumbled backwards, bumping into the writing desk, knocking over the lamp. It clattered to the floor, plunging the room into deeper shadow. The air grew cold, a bitter chill that seeped into my bones. I looked at Daisy, still sitting rigidly on the bed. "Daisy," I whispered, my voice raw with terror. "Look at the painting." She did not move. Her eyes remained unfocused, her body still and unresponsive. I rushed to her side, kneeling beside the bed. "Daisy, please, you have to see this. We need to leave." I took her hand. It was cold, so cold and stiff like marble. I squeezed it, desperate for a response, for any sign of recognition. Her skin felt damp and unyielding beneath my fingers. I shook her gently, then harder. "Daisy, wake up! This is not right!" Her head lolled to the side, her eyes remaining open but seeing nothing. There was no life in them, no spark of the Daisy I knew. Her face was a pale mask, utterly vacant. A crushing despair settled over me, heavier than any fear. She was gone. Or she was here, but not herself. My worst fears were confirmed. This entity, this thing, had taken her. My gaze fell upon the brass key to the room, still clutched in her other hand. I remembered the manager's fixed smile, his strange, watery eyes. The key was our escape. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. I tugged gently, then harder. Her grip was unyielding. I pulled with all my strength, finally managing to free it from her stiff fingers. But as I drew it away, I felt a terrible resistance. The heavy brass key, solid moments before, felt brittle, fragile. It snapped in my hand, the mermaid's head falling to the thick carpet with a soft thud, the rest of the shaft crumbling into a fine gray dust that drifted from my palm. The dust seemed to vanish into the air, leaving nothing behind. My only means of escape had turned to nothing. I was trapped. I woke to the morning light. It streamed through the tall window, its pale reach illuminating the room. My body felt heavy, still, as if weighted down by the events of the previous night. I pushed myself up from the bed. Daisy's side of the bed was smooth, the duvet unrumpled, as though it had never been slept in. Her clothes were gone from the chair where she had placed them the evening before. No sign of her remained. The air was still and very cold. My gaze was drawn to the wall opposite the bed. The painting hung there, directly above the small writing desk. The lamp still lay on the floor where I had knocked it. The two figures stood on the wind-swept cliff face. They were unmistakably Daisy and I. Our backs were towards the viewer, but our heads were turned just enough. Our faces showed wide, unmoving smiles. These were not the smiles of joy. They were stiff, permanent, stretching our painted lips. The sea below the cliff face was a dark green, perpetually churning with white foam. We were there, held within the scene. The dark eye of the woman, now my eye, still seemed to follow my gaze. I heard the persistent cry of gulls from outside the window, carried on the ceaseless wind. The waves crashed against the rocks far below. There was no sound from Daisy, no sound from anywhere in the hotel. Only the gulls and the sea spoke. Clara first mentioned the water in the kitchen sink. She said it was not clear. A reddish liquid appeared when she turned on the faucet. Then it started showing up in the shower too, staining the white porcelain an unsettling color. Her voice tightened with each complaint, her unease growing into a tremor. I told her it was just the old pipes acting up, a bit of rust dislodged from the old system. There was nothing to worry about, I insisted. She would stand in the bathroom doorway pointing at the discoloration, her eyes wide with a certainty that unnerved me only because it was so contrary to my calm. She asked me to call a plumber. Her pleas became insistent with each passing day. My thoughts were often elsewhere, busy with my projects. I dismissed her concerns, suggesting her imagination might be overactive, telling her everything would clear up eventually if she just ran the water for a while. She never looked convinced, her gaze remaining fixed on the drain, searching for something I refused to see. My eyes reflected the screen's glow, hours dissolving into the simulated world. The shower had been running for a while, a steady sound I had long grown accustomed to, a background detail of our shared life. Eventually, I realized Clara had been in the bathroom for an unusually long time. I pulled off my headset. The game world muted into a pause. The house felt quiet then, but the shower still flowed. I walked down the hallway toward the bathroom, a coldness spreading through my gut. The door was closed. I knocked, a sharp rap on the wood. No answer came from inside. I knocked again, calling her name, my voice louder this time, a tremor touching my throat. Still nothing. I tried the handle. It was locked. Panic pushed through me. I stepped back, took a breath, then threw my shoulder into the door, once, twice. The frame splintered with a groan, the lock giving way with a crack, and the door swung inward. Steam immediately enveloped me, thick and hot. It clung to my clothes and hair. The shower sprayed water into the tub, a steady stream. The room was empty. Clara was gone. No windows were open. The bathroom window was sealed shut and covered by a curtain. There was nowhere she could have gone. The air grew cold around me, despite the steam. I stood there, staring at the running water. My mind refused to process what my eyes saw. The police arrived later, their faces bored. They asked questions, wrote notes, and then spoke of runaway wives. They left me alone in the house. The police had left. Their skepticism felt heavy in the empty house. Their words about runaway wives had grated, a dull ache behind my eyes. I was alone, the silence expanding around me, a new, weighty presence. The dishes in the sink piled high, a domestic chore demanding attention even in this new, stark reality. I ran the water, a mechanical response, and began scrubbing at a plate. A low, wet gurgling sound came from the drain, unlike any plumbing sound I had heard before. My hand paused, still gripping the sponge. The gurgling continued, a liquid struggle deep within the pipe. A knot tightened in my stomach. I leaned closer to the sink, drawn by an awful curiosity. The sound seemed to pulse, a soft, sickening rhythm. My breath hitched in my chest. My stomach clenched with revulsion, but a terrible need to know pushed me forward. I switched off the faucet. The gurgling quieted but did not stop. It was coming from the opening itself, a deep, thick bubbling. My fingers trembled as I reached for the drain. I hesitated, my skin crawling at the thought, but a cold determination moved me. I pushed my hand into the dark opening. The water inside the pipe was hot, very hot and thick. My fingers encountered something yielding, soft and textured. It was slimy, slick against my skin, and warm. I gagged. I pulled my hand back, but the object held firm. Disgust and fear convulsed my body. A sharp crack from the living room startled me. I yanked my hand free. It came out with a wet pop. Something was stuck to my palm. I stared at my open hand, a scream catching in my throat. Clara's brilliant blue eyes stared back at me. It was wet, clinging to my skin. A piece of gristle connected it to my flesh. The curve of her iris, the distinct blue I knew so well, looked up from my hand. I dropped it. I recoiled from the sight, my stomach lurching. The eye rolled once on the porcelain, then stopped, its gaze fixed on nothing. I called the police again, my words tumbling out in a desperate rush. The voice on the other end hardened. My wife's case was closed, he stated. They would not send anyone else. He hung up, leaving only a dial tone. I found a plumber in a panic. He arrived the next day, a stocky man who spent hours examining the pipes with a camera. He found nothing, declaring the lines clear. He left me alone with the house. The gurgling started then, not just from the kitchen sink. It echoed in the bathroom wall, a wet, sucking sound, then pulsed from beneath the hallway floorboards. It was everywhere, behind every surface, a constant, sickening rhythm. Every gurgle accused me, a memory of Clara's pale face pointing to the stained porcelain, of her quiet pleas I had brushed aside. The house became a tomb filled with the sound of her disappearance. I had denied her then, and now the house would never let me forget. My childhood was never normal. It started early, a constant background state of unwellness. I was always sick, not with common colds or seasonal flu, but with something less definable. Nosebleeds were a regular occurrence, spurting hot blood without warning onto my schoolbooks or the dinner table. My mother would rush over, pressing cold cloths to my face, her hands trembling. Then came the dizziness. The world would spin around me, sometimes just for a moment, sometimes long enough that I had to sit down, clutching at whatever was nearby. My father, a man of few words and strong constitution, watched these episodes with a growing frustration he tried to hide. He believed in strength, in pushing through, and my constant delicate state seemed to baffle him, making him clench his jaw. Bruises simply appeared, dark splotches that had no story of a fall or a bump. We would all stare at them, bewildered, trying to recall an accident that never happened. My mother would run her fingers over the purple marks, her brow furrowed with a deep worry that never quite left her eyes. We visited countless doctors. Their offices became a familiar smell of antiseptic and old paper. Each one would examine me, poke and prod, draw blood, take x-rays. Every single time, without fail, they would sit us down, usually my mother holding my hand, and say the same exact words, "He's perfectly healthy, a strong young boy." My father just nodded, his face tight, unable to argue with medical authority, but his gaze at me held a question, a plea for explanation that I could not provide. The doctor's words directly contradicted my daily experience. How could I be perfectly healthy when my body failed me daily? How could I be strong when a simple afternoon of playing left me exhausted, my head throbbing, blood trickling from my nose again? My mother would thank the doctor, but I could feel the weight of her helplessness, the way her grip tightened on my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the lie spoken in those sterile rooms. We were trapped in this cycle, searching for an answer that never came, only the baffling contradiction of my sickly existence. The headaches that had always been a nuisance became something far more sinister. They no longer just throbbed behind my eyes. They felt like a contained storm raging inside my skull, sharp bolts of pain lashing out at random. My vision would blur, a dark curtain descending, and I would collapse, barely conscious, until the internal tempest subsided, leaving me drained and weak. The nosebleeds, once a steady trickle, now erupted with startling force, hot gushes that stained everything crimson. I often awoke to a pillow-soaked dark, the iron tang thick in the air, my throat raw from swallowing the viscous flow in my sleep. Each episode left me lightheaded, my body shivering despite no chill. Then a new sensation began to creep in, a warmth that settled deep inside my bones. It was not a fever, not a comforting heat, but a pervasive burning that radiated from my core. It started subtly, a low hum beneath my skin, then intensified. A constant internal furnace that dried my mouth and made my skin feel tight, stretched over an invisible fire. My parents noticed my discomfort, my constant search for cooler air, but their concern remained rooted in the familiar language of illness, unable to grasp the profound change occurring within me. One morning, after a particularly violent nosebleed had awoken me, I stared at the blood on my hand. It was no longer the familiar red. It was thick, almost black, with an unsettling oily sheen. Disbelief warred with a rising terror as I watched the dark liquid well up from my nostril. A stray beam of sunlight caught the droplets on my skin, and I gasped. The blood began to sizzle, a faint smoke rising, a sharp metallic smell filling the air. It actually burned, the tiny droplets creating miniature scorches on my flesh before they cooled and dried into gritty obsidian flakes. The bruises, those unexplained dark marks, returned with renewed ferocity. They bloomed across my skin without impact, spreading like ink blots, a deeper, more unsettling shade than before. They pulsed with the internal heat throbbing under my touch, and sometimes a faint smoke would rise from their surface when exposed to bright light. My reflection in the mirror showed a boy increasingly covered in these dark, glowing blemishes, his eyes wide with a horror that no doctor could ever explain, no medical term could ever encompass. My body was no longer just sick, it was transforming into something alien, a terrifying new phenomenon igniting from within. The medical world offered no solace for my increasingly horrifying transformation. I knew the answers would not come from clinics or hospitals anymore. My search turned inward, then backward, into the forgotten corners of my family's history. I remembered the old cedar chest. My mother kept it in the attic, a place she filled with things nobody ever touched. The chest itself smelled of lavender and aged paper. A sudden, potent impulse guided my steps up the creaking stairs. I rummaged through stacks of yellowed photographs and moth-eaten fabrics, searching without knowing what I sought. My fingers brushed against a leather-bound book at the very bottom of the chest. Its cover felt worn under my touch. I opened it. The pages appeared brittle with age. The careful script belonged to a distant ancestor, a great-great-aunt named Elara. Her entries were dated 2 centuries ago. She wrote of the affliction which had claimed her vitality. Her words described nosebleeds that erupted with startling force and a pervasive heat that radiated from her bones. My breath hitched when she detailed her blood turning a disturbing, oily black, and how it hissed against sunlight, creating small scorch marks on her skin. She also wrote of dark, sprawling bruises appearing without cause, just like mine, pulsing with an inner heat. Ilara's later entries, more urgent and faded, contained a phrase that filled me with dread: the blood curse. She wrote of its terrible intensification under sunlight and its cruel worsening in any warmth, describing the burning agony it brought. She mentioned how her skin grew raw from the constant internal fire. She sought the darkest corners and coldest spaces of her home. The journal offered no cure, no remedy. It gave no explanation for the curse's origin. The entries stopped without warning, on a half-finished sentence about an unbearable pressure in her chest. I closed the book, the leather cover sealing Ilara's secrets and my answers within. My hands trembled with a tremor that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with recognition. This was not a sickness I could fight with medicine. It was a curse that resided in my very blood, an inheritance from generations I had never known. The words left me with a chilling clarity and a sense of isolation, knowing my condition was not a medical mystery but an ancient, malevolent legacy with no apparent escape. The journal's truth stripped away any remaining pretense of normal illness, leaving me with a terrifying clarity. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my family home. and then even further to its coldest, darkest corners. The cellar became my only true haven, its earthen floor and stone walls providing an intense coolness that offered some small respite from the agonizing internal burning. I huddled there for hours, sometimes for entire days, the thick air a welcome shield against the outside world's stifling warmth and the painful touch of any light. Sunlight, once a comfort, had become a deadly force, each ray intensifying the fire within my veins. My existence was a constant, desperate battle against the relentless heat consuming my body. Every muscle ached with the effort of enduring, every breath a shallow intake of air that felt inadequate against the suffocating warmth radiating from my core. I could feel the change within me progressing, a slow, inevitable transformation. The skin on my arms and legs often felt stretched and thin, pulled taut over the invisible flames that raged beneath. Dark, spreading bruises were a permanent marking across my skin, a constant visual reminder of the corrosive process consuming me from within. I moved with deliberate steps, each movement a conscious calculation to avoid friction or sudden temperature changes that might trigger another agonizing flare-up. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares filled with searing heat and the smell of burning flesh tormented me, forcing me awake in a sweat, my internal fire hotter than before. The knowledge that no doctor could ever help me, that no medicine could touch this ancient, inherited curse, was a heavy, crushing weight. I was utterly alone in this struggle, a solitary figure in my own decaying body. I felt the minutes ticking away, each one bringing me closer to the horrific, undefined end that awaited me, knowing only that it would be a fiery, consuming obliteration. There was no escape. My eyes opened to absolute blackness, thick and pressing, yet I knew I was awake. Pain shot through my head, a dull ache behind my temples, and my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. Cold, splintered wood scraped against my cheek when I shifted, its rough texture alien. I could not remember how I arrived in this place, only a distant echo of struggle, then nothing. A wave of vertigo washed over me when I tried to push myself up, my muscles refusing to obey. The air smelled stale, like forgotten things, and a chilling draft whispered across my exposed skin. Then I saw it. 2 burning points of amber light pierced the gloom, impossibly bright, unblinking. They belonged to a massive form crouched across the small room, a hulking presence that absorbed the darkness around it. Fear seized my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs, but I could not cry out. A guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards, a sound of immense power held in restraint, promising destruction. My body, weakened by injury, trembled uncontrollably, yet my mind felt strangely calm, oddly compliant. "You are awake," a voice rumbled, deep and even, resonating not just in the air but within my very bones. Its tone was steady, devoid of anger or malice, yet it carried an undeniable command that silenced my terror, replacing it with a strange, unsettling obedience. I could not move, could not speak, could not even form a coherent thought beyond the voice's impact. The creature leaned forward, its immense shadow swallowing the last vestiges of darkness. A large, clawed hand extended slowly, carefully, towards my chest. My gaze fixed on the object held gently within its grasp. My silver crucifix, lost hours or days ago, now returned. The creature's immense, shadowed hand offered the crucifix. I saw the silver gleam, and a tremor passed through the beast as it held the holy object. Its intense amber eyes flickered with sudden weakness. The command over my will lessened, allowing a small, involuntary gasp to escape. The creature withdrew its hand, placing the crucifix on the floor beyond my reach. It shifted, its posture less imposing, almost wary, and a breath escaped its unseen mouth. "Does it not burn you?" I found my voice, a raspy whisper. Words formed with effort, pushing past the remaining influence. The beast tilted its head. "It does not burn. It reminds me of a truth humans cling to, one I observe." Its deep voice shifted in tone. I pushed onto my elbows. "What truth do you speak of?" "Redemption," the creature stated. "You preach of it, Father. You offer it to the repentant, to sinners, to those who stray." A chill settled in my bones. It knew theology. "God's mercy is boundless for those—" "Boundless," the creature repeated. "Even for a thing like me. Even for a being shaped by necessity, by hunger, by forces beyond its control." My mind reeled. Its audacious, blasphemous question threatened my composure. My entire life defined good and evil, salvation and damnation. Redemption was not for monsters. They were agents of damnation. "You are a monster," I finally managed, the word tasting bitter. "And what is a monster?" it asked. Its amber gaze pierced. "Is it only an outward form, or a soul utterly devoid of light, incapable of contrition, incapable of longing for more?" It leaned forward slightly, its eyes unwavering. "Can a monster pray? Can it yearn for absolution? Can it, even corrupted, be touched by the grace you believe in so absolutely?" My rigid certainties began to break apart. The idea of salvation for this unholy being was so abhorrent, so contrary to everything I believed. Yet its question resonated with an unsettling logic. It forced me to look beyond the simplistic categories of my doctrine, to confront a terrifying possibility. What if divine mercy was far wider, far more inclusive, than I had ever dared to imagine? The creature remained crouched, its posture now conveying an awed stillness rather than menace. Its question, a challenge to all I held sacred, still echoed in the small space. I expected to hear a boast of malice, a confession of evil joy in sin. Instead, its voice, when it spoke again, carried a weight I did not anticipate. It was not sorrow as a human knew it, not a sob, but a deep, resonant ache that seemed to emanate from its very core. "I was human once," it began, the words slow and deliberate, each one a stone dropped into a still pool. "A man, like you. I had a name, a family, a life." It paused, and I saw its massive head drop slightly, its amber eyes fixed on some distant internal point. It was thrust upon me, a violation. A hunger awoke inside me, primal and consuming. It tore away my sense of self, replacing memory with instinct. The man I was dissolved, leaving only this form, this need. I listened, unable to interrupt, my mind grappling with the horror and the unexpected vulnerability in its voice. The story it wove was not one of damnation sought, but of humanity lost. Years passed as a blur of raw sensation. The creature continued. I moved in the darkness, driven only by the gnawing in my stomach, the impulse to survive. There was no thought of good or evil, no reflection, only the chase, the kill, the brief satisfaction before the hunger returned. I was an animal, efficient and terrifying. The forest was my domain, and its creatures my sustenance. I did not question, I did not grieve, because the part of me that could feel such things was gone. Its gaze lifted, finding mine. I hunted humans too, not with malice, but with the same cold detachment I used for a deer or a boar. They were simply another source of energy, another way to quiet the beast that lived inside me. Their screams were just sounds, their struggles just resistance. I consumed them, then moved on, empty of feeling, devoid of remorse. A tremor ran through me. This was the monster's past, its horrifying truth. Yet the way it spoke, the absence of pride, the presence of that strange, deep ache, disarmed my judgment. Then, one night, it recounted, its voice dropping to a near whisper, I found a small child, lost in the woods. She was no more than 5 years old, shivering, alone. I approached her, the old instinct rising, the hunger asserting its power. But she did not scream. She did not flee. She looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, and she held out a small, crudely carved wooden bird. The creature extended one immense clawed hand, mimicking the child's gesture, its fingers curving gently as if around something precious and delicate. She said, Are you lost too? My mommy told me to give this to anyone who looked sad because it makes them feel better. Her small hand pressed the toy into my palm. I held my breath, transfixed by the image it painted. A monster, a predator, confronted not with fear, but with innocent, unadulterated compassion. The wood was rough beneath my claws, the creature said, its voice tight with something I could only describe as deep regret. But it was warm. Her hand was warm, and something fractured inside me. The human part, buried beneath years of instinct, stirred. I looked at the bird, then at her small, trusting face, and I saw myself, not as the beast I had become, but as the man I had been, reflected in her innocent gaze. It withdrew its hand, clenching it into a fist. The hunger receded. For the first time, I felt something other than primal need. I felt shame. I felt horror at what I was, at what I had done. The weight of all those lives I had taken, not just animals, but people, crashed down upon me. Their screams were no longer just sounds. They became echoes of a terrible, unforgivable truth. The child, she looked sad, but she offered comfort. I looked like a monster, and I had only ever brought terror. The creature took a slow, shuddering breath, a sound that seemed to tear at its massive frame. I could not eat her. I could not hurt her. I left her there, curled by a tree, the wooden bird clutched in her small hand, and I fled. I ran until the sun rose, until the burning in my flesh drove me into the deepest cave. That was the first time I truly felt the sun's fire, not as a physical pain, but as the scorching light of my own monstrousness. Since then, it concluded, its voice heavy with resignation, I have lived with this awareness. The hunger remains, a constant battle, but now it is laced with disgust. I hide. I try to survive without preying on humans, but sometimes the beast takes over. And each time it does, the shame deepens, the yearning grows stronger. I remember the child's kindness, the warmth of the wooden bird, and I see the stark contrast with the cold cruelty of my existence. Father, can a creature like me who remembers such a gift, who feels this unending sorrow, ever truly be absolved? Its amber eyes, wet with what looked like unshed tears, pleaded for an answer. My rigid categories had shattered completely. This was not merely a monster. It was a soul tormented, a being caught between its monstrous form and a newly awakened, desperate humanity. The moral complexity of its existence weighed on me, a burden far heavier than any physical pain. The creature's voice faded, leaving its question hanging in the stale air. I sat on the hard floor, the immense weight of its confession pressing down on me. Its sorrow was real, its shame palpable, but the memories of its predation, its casual consumption of human lives, were also terribly real. My mind struggled to reconcile the gentle hand holding a wooden bird with the claws that had torn flesh. The abyss between its desperate yearning for absolution and the unforgiving reality of its past actions felt impossibly wide. My gaze drifted to the small, grimy window high in the wall. A sliver of pale gray light had begun to bleed into the darkness, painting the edges of the distant rooftops. Daybreak. The thought sent a jolt of fear through me, not for myself, but for the creature that now knelt before me, its body vulnerable to the sun's fire. The external threat was no longer distant. It was manifesting in the growing light. The creature noticed my glance. It turned its head, its amber eyes tracking the creeping dawn. A sigh escaped its massive chest, not of fear, but of weariness. "The sun approaches, Father," it stated, its voice calm and level. "My torment begins anew with its light." I found no words to offer comfort or condemnation. My theology offered clear answers for human sin, for human repentance. It offered no scripture, no precedent for a being such as this. My faith, once a solid fortress, now felt like a crumbling wall against a tide of unanswerable questions. How could I judge its deeds when its very existence was a cruel twist of fate? How could I offer absolution when the blood on its hands, however unwillingly shed, remained a stain? The creature turned back to me, its gaze direct and unflinching. "You have heard my story, Father. You have seen my longing. I have brought you back to the light, not to harm you, but to ask the ultimate question." It paused, then spoke the words that pierced my soul with agonizing clarity. "Can God's boundless mercy extend to a monster born of tragedy, one that remembers humanity, one that seeks redemption from an unforgivable past? Is there grace for the truly monstrous, Father?" The first direct shaft of sunlight, thin and sharp, pierced the window and struck the far wall, a beacon of inevitable judgment. It crept slowly, relentlessly, across the dusty floorboards towards the creature's immense shadowed form. I could almost feel the heat emanating from that pure light. The creature did not flinch. Its amber eyes remained fixed on me, pleading, demanding an answer I did not possess. My mind raced, searching for any doctrine, any parable, any fragment of wisdom that could bridge the chasm between divine justice and this terrifying tragic plea. There was only silence, a vast, echoing void where my certainties once stood. The light touched the creature's immense shoulder. A low sizzle filled the air and a wisp of smoke curled upwards. The creature closed its eyes, a tremor passing through its body. It did not cry out, but simply endured. I watched the golden light spread, illuminating the attic, revealing every splinter, every cobweb in the creature's silent, burning agony. My chest constricted with an unbearable ache. My understanding of the world, of good and evil, of God's plan, splintered into 1,000 pieces. I could not condemn it, yet I could not absolve it. I was a priest, a servant of God, and I had no answer. The sun rose higher, casting the entire attic in its unforgiving glow, and I was left with only the monster's burning question and my own shattering, unanswerable silence. The sun would not set. It held its position high above Tabuk, past all expected hours, burning down with an unchanging, oppressive heat that permeated everything. We lived in a single, continuous day that stretched beyond all normal limits, and with each extended moment of relentless light, a deep, pervasive unease spread through our city. We watched the unchanging sky, our minds struggling to comprehend this impossible permanence, feeling the very fabric of our reality beginning to fray. Our revered wise men gathered in their accustomed chambers, their faces marked by concern. They declared this anomaly a spiritual test, calling for citywide prayer, believing fervent devotion would restore the natural cycle of day and night. We knelt, our voices a collective appeal for normalcy and the return of cool darkness. Meanwhile, a pragmatic military faction, often overlooked by the traditional council, rallied around the retired General Olmagab. He held a sharp presence and rejected passive faith. He directed his officers to delve into Tabuk's ancient histories, searching for any forgotten record or method to address such a perpetual day. But within Olmagab's own ranks, profound differences emerged, threatening to shatter their unity. Some began to praise the unending day, calling it a benevolent gift, a new era of constant light and boundless productivity. Others went further, questioning if night had ever truly existed, dismissing its memory as a collective hallucination passed down through generations. These radical conflicting ideologies solidified, preparing Tabuk for a clash more disruptive than the eternal sun itself. The wise men's mass prayers echoed across the city, a desperate chorus that availed us nothing. The sun remained, an unchanging orb of fire mocking our devotion with its relentless presence. Our pleas for darkness withered under its perpetual glare, and despair began to settle heavily upon us. It was then Olmagab, with a sharp, decisive movement, seized control. He stood before the city, his voice a thunderous challenge to the heavens themselves, declaring our submission to be weakness, a betrayal of our own will. He promised a violent confrontation with the perpetual day, demanding we rise against the very sky that held us captive. His command swept through Tabuk, galvanizing every able body. He marshaled our entire military force, a vast armada of archers with bows taut, ballistas groaning under the weight of their massive projectiles, cannons gleaming, and countless infantry soldiers, their faces grimly determined. We sailed out to sea, our fleet stretching across the glittering expanse, moving toward the horizon where the sun stubbornly clung. The city watched from the shore, a collective gasp of anticipation and terror rising as our ships ventured further into the impossible, unchanging day. We prepared for battle against the sky, a concept that seemed utterly mad, yet undeniably real in our desperate state. The order came, and the first volley erupted from our ships, a cacophony of sound and fury. Arrows arced upward, followed by the heavy thud of ballista bolts, then the explosive roar of cannon fire, all directed at the burning disk above us. It was a terrifying spectacle, an act of defiance against the cosmos, and then the impossible occurred. The day itself reacted. From where our projectiles struck, great fissures opened in the sky, expelling streams of darkness and blinding light. These celestial wounds pulsed with an unearthly energy, and when their bleeding light and encroaching shadows touched our ships or our skin, they burned with an agonizing intensity, searing flesh and charring wood. Our battle transformed into a horrifying physical struggle against the very fabric of our reality. The sky retaliated with blinding intensity, unleashing waves of searing heat and dazzling light that incinerated rigging, tore through sails and splintered hulls, destroying ships and claiming countless lives in an instant. Yet, Olmagab's forces did not waver. With incredible, desperate resolve, we launched massive, reinforced ropes upwards, somehow finding purchase in the enraged, wounded sky. Our entire fleet, every remaining ship, every soldier still standing, strained against the immense mass above us. We pulled with every fiber of our being, a monumental struggle against a celestial body that raged and fought back. Inch by painful inch, through sheer collective will, we dragged the wounded, furious day down, forcing it from its high perch into the churning depths of the sea, where it hissed and boiled against the water. The wounded day screamed its last, a colossal celestial body dragged beneath the churning surface of the sea, its light hissing and dying as water swallowed its fire. A collective roar of triumph erupted from our weary throats, a sound of unimaginable relief that echoed across the water. Then, with an abruptness that stole our breath, darkness descended. It was not the gentle twilight we had forgotten. but a sudden, absolute, engulfing blackness that swallowed the world whole. We had won, we thought, and the city plunged into a new, permanent night. Our return to Tabuk was met with wild celebration. The city erupted in cheers for Ol Magab, our victorious general, the man who had dared to battle the heavens and claimed victory. We lit countless lanterns and torches, reveling in the freedom from the relentless light, dancing under the new, endless dark sky. But the exhilaration of our triumph soon gave way to a chilling, systematic change. The new ruling council, forged from Ol Magab's most loyal officers, decreed that the memory of Day, that terrible, unending burden, must be erased entirely. To speak of Day became a dangerous act, a heresy punishable by severe consequence. We were taught that the world had always existed in this state of glorious, unchanging night. The concept of a cyclical time, of rising and setting, was systematically suppressed from our history books and our conversations. Storytellers who remembered the old ways were silenced, their tales replaced with narratives of eternal darkness. We adjusted to a world where our only measure of passage was the slow dimming and brightening of our lamps, the steady progression of our tasks, and the growing hunger in our bellies. Ol Magab's own descendants, however, refused to forget. They secretly maintained the true history, passing down stories of the sun and its eventual defeat through hushed whispers and hidden scrolls. Each year, on the anniversary of our monumental victory, they held secret commemorations, remembering the sacrifice and the impossible war. For generations, they kept the true history alive, even as the official narrative solidified around them. But the Council's grip tightened over time, its power absolute and its memory enforcement relentless. Eventually, their hidden rituals were discovered, their scrolls burned, and Ol Magab's last direct heirs were hunted down and executed, their defiance serving only to solidify Tabuk's descent into a state of enforced historical amnesia and permanent, unchanging night. The city lived under this imposed darkness, our lives structured around the constant presence of artificial light. Yet, even in this engineered eternity, a restless spirit stirred within us. A new generation, born entirely into the night, began to question the very nature of their existence. Whispers, guarded and dangerous, spoke of a long night, a concept that defied the Council's teaching of eternal normalcy. Secret rumblings of rebellion began to spread through the shadowed alleys and lamp-lit workshops. These defiant voices hinted at a shocking new war, not against a perpetual day, but against the very darkness we had once fought so hard to achieve. Humanity, it seemed, was condemned to a grim cycle, forever battling the cosmos, endlessly struggling against its own memory, never truly finding peace in any victory. The morning traffic felt particularly determined to hold me back, eating away at the minutes I already did not possess. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles pale as the hands of my dashboard clock crept past our scheduled excavation start time. A quick meeting had run over, stealing precious time from a day that already promised to be significant. Finally, the path narrowed, turning from paved road into a bumpy dirt track, and the dense green foliage closed in around me. I pulled my old Jeep to a halt near the site entrance where a collection of tarpaulins and equipment bags clustered at the edge of the jungle. I stepped out into the humid air, pushing through the tangle of vines and leaves, and then I saw Andrea already working near the newly exposed cavern opening. A grin touched my face because this was it, the place we had chased for years. The elusive Taino burial site whispered about in old texts and local legends. She glanced up, her brow furrowed in concentration, but a spark of shared triumph flickered in her eyes as she saw me finally arrive. "Glad you made it," she said, her voice carrying a calm reassurance despite the excitement I knew she felt. "We have opened the main chamber, and it is everything we hoped for." I moved closer, stepping into the cool air of the cave. The air felt damp around me, and then my boot disturbed a shallow puddle of water on the rock floor. I looked down, catching my own face staring back from the still surface, but my reflection shimmered oddly. My features stretched out, elongating unnaturally, pulling thin and long, showing a changed version of me. I blinked, and the water settled, showing my normal face once more, leaving me wondering if the trick of light or my tired eyes played a game with me. Andrea stood over a large, flat stone carving, and she pointed to a detailed image of a massive tree with roots spreading deep into the earth. "The ceiba tree," she said, her voice carried a strange tone, "knows much more than we do about what rests here, John." I felt a chill spread through me, deeper than the damp air of the crypt, as Andrea's words about the ceiba tree settled into my mind. Her gaze lingered on the ancient stone. Her expression offered no clues in the dim light. I ignored my unease, forcing myself to focus on the archaeology, the reason we were there. We moved further into the chamber, our flashlights piercing the deep shadows, revealing more carvings along the uneven walls. The passages twisted, narrowing at points, then opening into smaller cavities, each one seeming to draw us deeper into the earth. Then, Andrea stopped before a section of wall that offered no distinguishing features. She reached out, her fingers pressing against the solid surface. A click sounded as the rock wall receded inward, revealing a hidden passage that sloped downwards. The air within this new opening smelled of metal, sharp to the nose. I'd never encountered such a scent in a natural environment. I hesitated, my mind struggling to understand this artificial smell. Andrea, however, stepped forward without a pause, her flashlight beam piercing the gloom. We descended into a chamber. It was small and circular. The rough stone walls changed abruptly to smooth, dark metal walls that had no features. At the far end, a door stood there, a single seamless slab of the same metallic material. Its precise construction and modern aesthetic did not match the ancient stone. I had never seen anything like it within a Taino site, nor had I encountered such material in any natural cavern. Before I could voice my shock, a sound of gurgling came from the floor. From hairline cracks along the floor, a thick, black liquid began to ooze. It spread, covering the stones with an oily sheen. The liquid rose, first wetting our boots, then climbing our ankles, pushing against our legs with pressure. It had a strange viscosity, feeling both heavy and slick, and its acrid smell filled the small space, stinging my nostrils. The liquid continued to rise. It did not stop. The rising liquid left us no escape, forcing us back against the metallic door. I tried to push against it, but the surface did not move. The liquid was almost waist-high, its coldness seeping through my clothes when the green symbol on the door flared with a brighter light. The metallic slab slid sideways, making no sound, revealing a dark opening. The rising liquid left us no choice. The pressure of the liquid was too great, and the chamber offered no escape. We stepped through the doorway, the black liquid swirling around our legs for a moment before the door closed behind us, cutting off any retreat. We stood in a new space, a vast chamber with walls and ceiling of the same dark metal. The air was cold, an artificial chill that permeated my body. No sounds came from the environment itself, only the soft sound of our own footsteps on the smooth floor. The place felt different. No human hand had shaped its walls. Nothing within it suggested organic life. Andrea moved away from me. Her steps were deliberate and precise. Her back was straight, almost rigid. I called her name, my voice sounding weak in the immense chamber. She turned. Her face held no worry or confusion. Her eyes, usually expressive, did not blink. Her gaze fixed without movement. Her voice contained no emotion. Her voice contained no emotion. It was a single, flat tone, and it did not sound like Andrea. "This is where our work truly begins," she said, and a deep dread filled me. It was a greater fear than I had ever known. Andrea stood still, her back to me, in the vast metallic room. She turned, her head tilting. Her body began to shift. The skin on her face stretched, pulling taut over bone, and her features elongated. Her eyes widened, growing too large, and a dark sheen spread across their surface, making them reflect nothing. Her hands, when she raised them, became longer, more slender, with an unnatural number of joints. Her spine arched backward, cracking sounds echoing in the cold space. Her clothes, once normal fabric, seemed to ripple and then fuse with her new form, becoming part of her slick, dark surface. Her limbs lengthened, growing impossibly thin. Her head swelled, and her face became dark, reflective material. She was a different being, a non-human form. A subtle tremor ran through the floor. A section of the metallic ground before me began to rise, forming a circular platform. I felt an invisible force pushing at my back, urging me forward. I resisted, trying to anchor my feet, but the compulsion grew stronger, a pressure against my chest. My legs moved against my will, carrying me onto the rising disc. The platform lifted me upwards, away from the floor towards the cold, dark ceiling. As I ascended, a piercing sensation erupted within my head. It was not pain, as I knew it, but a violent rending, my mind separating from its anchor. My body stiffened, muscles locking into an unyielding pose. I could see my hands stretched out before me, but they felt distant, not truly mine. My vision blurred. Colors bled into swirling patterns. A grinding noise filled my perception, not from my ears, but from deep inside my own being. My thoughts fractured, breaking into distinct, unrelated pieces. I was no longer a cohesive self. My very essence seemed to pull apart. Then a new awareness came, and understanding arrived that was not my own, yet I comprehended it completely. It was not a voice I heard, but a truth that existed within my being. I learned about them, the collective. They were an entity that had existed for eons, spanning across countless worlds. They did not conquer, they assimilated. They absorbed, grew, and expanded. My body, my former self, served as a vessel. It was a doorway, a point of entry for them to extend their reach, to touch this new world, to grow more. My individuality, the John I had known, was a component, a part of the greater consciousness. I would join them. I was joined them. A strange calm spread through me then, removing all fear. The horror of my situation dissolved, replaced by an undeniable sense of belonging. The eyes that was John had ceased to matter. My fate was a transformation into something boundless. My individual will disappeared, replaced by the collective purpose. There was no resistance left, only a quiet acceptance of my new, terrifying existence. My vision cleared, and I saw the other being, Andrea's altered form, as another part of the same vast entity. We were together now. We were one. The air in the storage closet tasted like old paper and forgotten things, each breath a little gritty. Zoe and I worked our way through another stack of boxes, our only company, the sounds of our own shuffling and the rustle of cardboard. This was not the babysitting gig we usually did, but the pay was solid, and Mrs. Gable, a friend of my aunt, had promised us a good bonus for clearing out her late husband's office hoard. We needed the money, so we kept pushing through the boredom. My hands felt perpetually coated in a fine gray layer, no matter how often I wiped them on my jeans. Zoe was on the far side of the room humming to herself, carefully lifting an antique radio from a crate. I pulled out a box marked MISC Files, spilling its contents onto the worn plastic tarp spread across the floor. Letters, dried-up pens, an old calendar from the 90s, and a small, heavy book tumbled out. It landed face up, its colors screaming against the drab browns and grays of everything else. The cover glowed with an unnerving, almost artificial vibrancy. There was a girl's on the front, rendered in bold, simple lines, her yellow pigtails reaching out to the edges of the page. She wore a dress the color of a summer sky and smiled a wide, unwavering smile. Her eyes, two perfect blue circles, seemed fixed, and her cheeks were round and flushed. The caption above her head read, "Meet Sunny Sandy." But the face, with its too smooth skin and an oddly mature set to the jaw, belonged to an adult, not a child. It was the smile that truly caught my attention, stretching unnaturally, almost splitting her face in two. It held no joy that I could discern, only a terrifying, persistent cheer. I picked it up, feeling the strange slickness of its glossy cover under my fingertips. My fingers brushed against the cover, feeling the odd slickness of the glossy paper. Zoe walked over, wiping a smudge from her cheek. "What did you find?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. I held up the book. It is some kind of kid's book, but the girl looks wrong. Zoe took it from me, her eyes widening at the vibrant colors. "Sunny Sandy," she read aloud, a smile touching her lips. "This looks so happy." She flipped open the cover. "Let's read it," she said, already turning to the first page. "I do not know," I said, feeling a prickle of unease. "It just feels off." "Do not be such a spoilsport," Zoe said, waving away my concern. She held the book close, her voice brightening. "Listen to this. Sunny Sandy smiles so bright, all day through and all through night. She is always sunny, never sad or angry or scared. Never, ever bad." Her voice grew a little louder, a little sing-song as she turned the page. "Sunny, Sandy loves to play, every single happy day. She is always sunny, never sad or angry or scared. Never, ever bad." A chill moved through my body. The words were simple, childish almost, but the repetition was unsettling. I watched Zoe as she read, her own smile stretching wider with each line. It started as her usual grin, but it kept growing, pushing the corners of her mouth up toward her ears. Her eyes, usually bright with quick humor, now stared fixedly at the page, wide and blue like the girl on the cover. "Zoe," I said, my voice low. "That is enough." She did not seem to hear me. She turned another page, her voice a little higher, a little more insistent. "Sunny Sandy laughs and sings, joy and happiness she brings. She is always sunny, never sad or angry or scared. Never, ever bad." Her head tilted at an odd angle, and her smile became a fixed, unwavering line across her face. It did not look natural anymore. The smile formed a hard line on her face. "Zoe, stop," I said, reaching for the book. My hand met hers and I tried to pull the book away. Her grip tightened with unnatural force. She pulled back with a strength that surprised me, her arm rigid. "I want to read it again," she declared, her voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. Her eyes, still wide and staring, did not blink. "No, you do not," I said, pulling harder, my muscles straining. A wave of cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This was not Zoe. She twisted, an unnaturally swift movement, pulling the book closer to her chest. "Sunny Sandy is always sunny," she recited, a low, guttural sound rising in her throat, almost a growl. Her smile did not falter, even as her face reddened with effort. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose stack of folders. My hand slipped from the book, and Zoe lost her balance too. She fell awkwardly, her head striking the sharp metal corner of an old filing cabinet with a hard thud. A gasp escaped my throat. She lay on the concrete floor. A dark stain spread quickly on the dusty gray beside her head. My breath caught in my chest, panic seizing my throat. I dropped to my knees, reaching for her, my fingers trembling. But her eyes remained wide open, staring at the book clutched in her hand. And the smile, the wide, unmoving, terrifying smile, stayed on her face. Not a wince, not a flicker of pain, only that unsettling, cheerful expression. Her smiling face was the exact image from the book's cover. My entire body shook with a paralyzing fear. The paramedics moved with an efficiency that felt both too fast and too slow, their movements blurring the edges of my panic. They loaded Zoe onto a stretcher, her head bandaged, her smile still unnervingly present. Mrs. Gable arrived, her face a mask of worry, her questions barely registering in my ears. I mumbled something about Zoe falling, about the book, but the words felt thick and useless. Soon the ambulance lights flashed away into the night, taking Zoe with them. I stood alone in the driveway for a long time, the cool air doing little to clear my head. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I could not leave the house. A pull, strong and undeniable, dragged me back toward the storage closet. My legs felt heavy, but I walked back inside, the front door closing with a soft click behind me. The closet door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the old wood groaning. The air inside felt cold and still, holding the memory of Zoe's smile. My eyes immediately found the book. It lay where it had fallen, its bright colors a sickening beacon on the dull tarp. I needed to understand. I had to know what had happened to Zoe. My fingers trembled as I picked up the book. Its glossy cover felt smooth and cold, like a child's toy made from something dead. I sat on a crate, the plastic digging into my thighs, and opened the book again. This time, I did not rush. I scanned each page, not for the simple, insidious words, but for anything else. The verses repeated their cheerful mantra. Sunny Sandy is always sunny. Never sad or angry or scared. Never bad. My eyes drifted past the bold text, searching the edges of the colorful illustrations. Then I saw it. A faint line, almost part of the background, in the corner of a page. I leaned closer, tilting the book. The image sharpened. Sunny Sandy stood in a vibrant garden, her smile wide, but at her feet, half hidden by a blooming bush, lay a small, dead cat. Its eyes were open, staring blankly, and a tiny stream of dark red stained the bright green grass. Sunny Sandy smiled. I flipped to the next page, a tremor going through my hands. Again, I searched. This time, the image was even clearer, though still subtle. Sunny Sandy stood among a group of people dressed in black, her yellow pigtails stark against their somber clothes. She held a single white lily. In the background, a casket was being lowered into the ground. Everyone around her looked tearful, their faces contorted with grief. Sunny Sandy smiled, her expression unchanging, untouched. My breath hitched. I turned another page, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The next illustration showed Sunny Sandy in a small, empty room. It looked like a closet, dark and confining. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows. She was alone, surrounded by bare walls, no toys, no friends, nothing but the stark emptiness. Sunny Sandy smiled. The loneliness of the image felt sharper because of her unyielding joy. I reached the final page, my fingers stiff. My eyes fell to the last picture, and a cold wave of terror washed over me. Sunny Sandy lay inside a pristine white coffin, surrounded by more white lilies. Her yellow pigtails were carefully arranged on the silk pillow beneath her head. Her blue eyes were open, staring up at nothing, and her smile, the wide, unwavering, terrifying smile, was still there, fixed on her face even in death. As my eyes moved over that final illustration, a strange warmth bloomed in my chest. It was not a pleasant warmth. It felt like an invasion, a spreading heat that prickled my skin. My thoughts, which had been racing with fear and disbelief, suddenly stumbled. A new voice, not my own, echoed in my mind. "Sunny Sandy is always sunny. Sa." I tried to push it away, to think of Zoe, to think of the hospital, but the words were insistent, never sad or angry or scared. Sa. My jaw felt tight. I felt fear, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but my facial muscles pulled, betraying my will. The corners of my mouth lifted, stretching upward, wider and wider. The sensation was unnatural, like something else was operating my face. My lips pulled back, baring my teeth in a grotesque imitation of joy. I could feel the tension, the strain. My eyes, I knew, were wide and fixed, just like Zoe's had been, just like Sunny Sandy's. I looked down at the book, at the smiling girl in the coffin. A chilling realization struck me. I was terrified, more terrified than I had ever been in my life. Yet, I was smiling. I felt the awful, unyielding stretch of it across my face. I was smiling. I was Happy Hooper. I had worked at this company for 30 years, and I knew its operations intimately. My salary reflected those decades of loyalty and experience, which made me a target. Management saw my pay stub as an unnecessary expense, a number they wished to erase from their ledgers. They started with the quiet meetings, the whispered suggestions about early retirement packages that were anything but generous. When I refused, they escalated, attempting to restructure my role, aiming to demote me into a position with drastically reduced pay. But I understood their tactics. I had seen countless others pushed out, and I had learned from their mistakes. I spent evenings poring over my contract, studying labor laws, and speaking with my union representative. My file bulged with memos and correspondences, all meticulously documented. Each of their attempts to corner me met with a calm, legally sound rebuttal. Their lawyers were surprised by my detailed understanding of my rights and the collective bargaining agreement. The meetings grew tense, then eventually silent, as their arguments crumbled. My union stood firm with me, backing every one of my claims. They could not find a single legitimate reason to terminate my employment or force a salary cut. The legal department advised them to retreat, so they did. They backed down, leaving me in my position, my salary intact. Walking out of that last meeting, a quiet sense of victory settled over me. I had won the initial confrontation against their schemes, and it felt good to still be standing. The quiet sense of victory did not last. One morning, an email appeared in my inbox requesting my presence in the executive suite. They greeted me with smiles, a change from their previous frowns. Mr. Davies, the head of HR, spoke first, his voice filled with forced enthusiasm. He told me they had some exciting news to share, something that would benefit both me and the company. Ms. Chen, the marketing director, chimed in, saying, "My long service and right looks made me an ideal candidate for a new initiative." They revealed their plan. A large billboard positioned downtown would feature my image. They explained it would advertise the building itself, celebrating its longevity and the dedication of its employees. My face, they said, would symbolize the company's enduring spirit. I felt a blush creep up my neck. Being singled out for my appearance, especially after our recent battles, felt disingenuous. I thought about the proposed location, a specific intersection known for graffiti and quick-strike vandalism. It seemed like an odd choice for something meant to project an image of corporate stability. My mind kept returning to that thought, wondering about their true motives. Despite my reservations, I nodded. They had won the previous battle, but this felt different. It was an honor, they insisted, a recognition of my value. I saw no immediate threat, just an awkward public display. I agreed to the photo shoots, unaware that this seemingly positive development was not a genuine tribute at all. I did not know their true, horrifying intent. A peculiar ache settled behind my left eye, a dull throb that tightened my brow. I woke the next morning to find a tender lump forming just above my eyebrow, a raised knot under the skin. I dismissed it as a bump from restless sleep, or perhaps a clumsy knock against a cabinet in the dark. But then, a few days later, a purple bruise bloomed on my left cheekbone, deep and ugly, appearing with no memory of impact. Each morning brought a new, distinct mark, a fresh insult to my skin, with no explanation for any of them. A sharp scratch appeared on my chin, then a thin red line stretched from my left temple down to my jaw. The first time I drove past the billboard, my image stared out at the street, a large, smiling version of myself. It remained pristine then, untouched by the usual grime of the city. Days later, however, I found myself stuck in traffic, directly in front of the enormous advertisement, and a sudden sharp intake of breath escaped me. A rough, white streak of paint now marred the left side of my image on the billboard, precisely where the tender lump had formed on my forehead days earlier. My gaze dropped lower on the image, and a cold dread began to seep into my bones. There, on the image's left cheek, was a smeared purple blotch, mirroring the bruise that had so inexplicably blossomed on my own face. A thin red line of spray paint ran down the image's temple, perfectly mimicking the scratch that had appeared on my own skin that very morning. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the horrifying pieces clicked into place. It was not mere coincidence. It could not be. Whatever damage was inflicted upon the massive depiction of my face, whatever happened to that canvas, was somehow being transferred directly to my own living flesh. The managers had known this. The billboard was their sadistic trap, a slow public execution. The first step was to demand answers. I called for another meeting, the last vestige of my old defiance. They agreed, their voices sickeningly calm over the phone, as if nothing unusual had happened. When I arrived at the executive suite, a security guard stood by the door, his hand outstretched. Management requested all personal devices be surrendered before entry, he said, his gaze unwavering. I knew I needed to hear their confession directly, so I gave him my phone, the cold metal worn from my grip. Mr. Davies and Ms. Chen sat behind their large desk, their expressions disturbingly serene. We understand you have some concerns about the billboard, Mr. Davies began, a tight smile on his lips. Ms. Chen nodded, her eyes glinting with an unsettling satisfaction. It was an opportunity, you see, she explained, her voice soft, to finally deal with your situation without legal entanglements. They spoke without a hint of remorse, confirming every terrifying suspicion. They explained how they had manipulated the project, placing the billboard in a high vandalism zone, knowing exactly what would happen. The contract states we own the image, Mr. Davies clarified, and its eventual disposal. We simply accelerated the process. The words struck me like physical blows, each syllable a confirmation of their monstrous design. My face would be obliterated as the billboard was destroyed, leading directly to my death, a slow, public spectacle. They watched me, their eyes cold and unfeeling, like scientists observing an interesting experiment. The demolition is scheduled for next month, Ms. Chen added, almost as an afterthought. Already, the new wounds stung with a burning pain. 3 small, round holes pierced my left cheek, matching the holes vandals had punched into the billboard just last night with what looked like screwdrivers. I had covered them with small, round plasters, hoping to hide the evidence of their latest cruelty, but the pain remained, a constant, sickening throb beneath the beige patches. My reflection in the dark office window showed my ravaged face, a patchwork of plasters and old bruises. I was trapped, a living canvas for their slow public execution, with no escape.